The Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 23. Father, sanctify us by your truth. Your word is truth. In Jesus' name, amen. Luke chapter 23, verse 1, Then the whole assembly rose and led him to Pilate. Now, Jesus is still popular with the crowds, and the religious rulers don't want the people to be angry with them. And so if they can get Pilate to crucify Jesus, they figure they have it made. Jesus will be dead, and the people will blame Rome, not them. That's their plan. 2, and they began to accuse him, saying, We found this man perverting our nation, and forbidding us to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ the King. And, they just lie. To say that Jesus forbid them to pay taxes is a flat-out lie. He said the exact opposite. He said, Render to Caesar the things, therefore, that are Caesar's. So the whole thing is just so ridiculous. As if they're standing up for Rome, too. I mean, it's just laughable, and Pilate sees right through him also. 3, Pilate asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? He answered, You truly say so. Well, he wouldn't deny that he was the king of the Jews. And, of course, Pilate was interested in that accusation because you didn't want to be a rival king to Caesar in that day. You didn't live very long. 4, Then Pilate said to the chief priest and to the people, I find no fault in this man. He saw right through what they're doing. And he knew Jesus wasn't a threat. 5, But they insisted, saying, He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to here. He stirred them up, all right. He stirred them up to holiness. He stirred them up to communion with God and dedication to the Lord. That's the only thing he was guilty of. 4, Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the people, I find no fault in this man. He had seen enough rebels to know that Christ wasn't one. Verse 6, When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. Pilate wants to weasel his way out of this one. And he thinks that he maybe has found a way to do that. Verse 7, When he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Pilate didn't want to handle the Jesus case because he knew Christ was innocent, but he didn't want to release him and anger the rulers. He was a coward. If Pontius Pilate didn't want to be involved in things like this, then he should have dug ditches for a living or worked in the salt mines instead of taking a job as a governor. I mean, because a good leader, no doubt, will anger some people, just like a preacher. 8, When Herod saw Jesus, he greatly rejoiced, for he had desired to see him for a long time, because he had heard many things of him, and he was hoping to see some miracle performed by him. Herod evidently was bored with his jugglers and magicians and other entertainers. He wants some fresh entertainment, and he figures Christ can provide that. 9, He questioned him with many words, but he gave no answer. Jesus would not even respond to that scum. 10, because he wasn't interested in truth anyways. 10, The chief priest and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Well, they don't miss an opportunity, do they? And the religious rulers are turning up their accusations. They're in a panic because it looks like Christ might be released. Verse 11, Then Herod with his soldiers despised him and mocked him and dressed him in a fine robe and sent him back to Pilate. So Jesus wouldn't do tricks for Herod, and he wouldn't answer him either. And Herod doesn't like that. So he gets Jesus back by having his men mock him. 12. On the same day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, having previously been at enmity with each other. They found common ground in their opposition to Jesus. People find it easier to be bad when they have someone to be bad with, you know. They can pat each other on the back, tell each other how wonderful they are. 13, Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people. So after Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate, Pilate summons all the Jewish rulers together to settle this Jesus issue once and for all. 14, and said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who incites the people. And truly, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him." In other words, Jesus is not guilty. That's what Pilate says. He doesn't deserve to be punished. Verse 15. No, neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing worthy of death has been done by him. So Pilate even appeals to Herod's opinion as further proof that Christ should be released. And my question to Pontius Pilate would be, who cares? Who cares what Herod thinks? Why do you appeal to him? His opinion doesn't matter. The right to be treated fairly comes from God, not man. You don't have to appeal to the authority of man when it comes down to questions of right and wrong. You stand on the truth. You stand on the word of God. 16. So Pilate says, "I will therefore chastise him and release him," which makes no sense at all because he just argued for the innocence of Jesus. And he is wrong if he thinks beating Christ will satisfy those bloodthirsty sinners who want Jesus dead. Sinning to satisfy an ungodly person never works. 17, for he was obliged, or actually verse 16, again, "I will therefore chastise him and release him, for he was obliged to release one man to them at the feast." And this was an unwritten law, but Rome was expected to release one Jewish prisoner during the Passover every year. 18, but they all cried out at once, saying, "Take this man away and release Barabbas to us." Away with Jesus. Execute him, is what they're saying. They chose Barabbas to be released rather than Jesus. 19, this man, talking about Barabbas, had been thrown in prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Bunch of hypocrites. They demand that Jesus be put to death for rebelling against Rome, and now they insist that Barabbas, who really did rebel against Rome, be released. Given enough time, hypocrites expose themselves, and they just did, if anybody is quick enough to pick it up. 20. Therefore Pilate spoke to them again, desiring to release Jesus. You know, the longer this thing goes on, the more convinced Pilate is that Jesus is innocent. And the clearer it becomes that the rulers are wicked and full of envy toward Christ. That's what this is all about. 21, but they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." And, you know, this is really getting to these religious rulers, and they're sensing that Pilate wants Jesus released, so they get more intense and angry. 22, he said to them a third time, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no cause worthy of death. I will therefore chastise him and release him." And I just don't get it. Pilate didn't have to bargain with these Jews. He didn't need their approval to release Christ, and if he would have been a leader worthy of the title, he would have done it. 23, but they insisted with loud voices, asking that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So the religious leaders would not back down. 24. So Pilate gave the sentence as they demanded. He released to them the man who was thrown in prison for insurrection and murder, whom they asked for, but he sentenced Jesus according to their will. Pilate is no leader. leader does the right thing even when no one follows. 26. And as they led him away, they seized Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him to carry it behind Jesus. And this Simon, he was forced to carry this cross because Roman soldiers could force you to do anything you wanted, or they wanted you to do, and you couldn't say no. 27. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and lamented him. They cry because they care about Christ, and it's tough to watch him suffer. Verse 28. Jesus turned to them, saying, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Israel rejected God's king and is about to kill God's only begotten Son. They have made their choice. They will not have God rule over them. So they will not have God's protection either, because those two things go hand in hand. And Jesus knows what they're in for because of that. So he says, don't cry for me. You better cry for yourself. And he tells them why in verse 29. Listen, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren who never bore and never nursed. When Rome smashes Israel in 70 A.D., those who don't have children will be glad that they don't. Jesus knows that many children will starve to death during the siege, and many will be killed by the Roman army right before their parents' eyes. 30. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. And the way I figure it, if a mountain falls on me, I'm dead. And so it's going to get so bad for Israel that they will wish to die. And you know what? If you die without Jesus Christ in your life, there's going to come a time when you wish you could go out of existence, but you won't. 31. For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Jesus is saying they're doing this to an innocent person. What do you think they're going to do to you who have rebelled against them so many times? I haven't even rebelled against them, and they're crucifying me. What do you think is going to happen to you? 32. 2 different men who were criminals also were led with him to be killed. So to add to the Lord's shame and to make it appear as if Jesus is one of the worst, he's executed alongside 2 hardcore criminals. 33. When they came to the place which is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. And this fulfills an Old Testament prophecy in Isaiah 53:12. It says, He poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors. And Jesus died like a criminal because he was paying for our crimes against God. 34, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they divided his clothes by casting lots. This prayer of Jesus, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do, is for the Roman soldiers. To them, Christ was just a criminal who had been found guilty. They were doing their job. They didn't know that Jesus was innocent. But did you ever notice that Jesus never prayed, Father, forgive Judas? Father, forgive Pilate? And that's because they did know that Jesus was innocent. They just didn't care. And they didn't repent. So there's no point in praying for people like that. They have committed a sin unto death. 35. The people stood by watching, but the rulers with them scoffed, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen one of God. In other words, the religious leaders are saying, to qualify as our Messiah, you have to agree to these terms, Jesus. If you act how we want you to act, if you are a puppet, and you let us pull your strings, then we will believe in you. Well, there's just one thing. This is God's world, and no one dictates anything to him. 36, and the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him sour wine, saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. To a Roman soldier, power meant you could have things your way. They think Christ is a liar because they figure no one in their right mind would suffer crucifixion if they really had the ability to stop it. 38, an inscription was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, this is the King of the Jews. And so Pilate would not pass up an opportunity to take a cheap shot at Jesus. I should say at the Jews. And that's what this sign is. It's a cheap shot at the Jews. Not even directed at Jesus. This was Pilate's way of saying, look, world, I've humiliated the Jews and their king. 39. One of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. This criminal showed no remorse and did not repent. His only concern was avoiding the punishment for his sin. And that is the mark of a person who should be punished and should not be forgiven. 40. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, seeing you are under the same sentence? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing amiss. This criminal can deny the Scripture, and he can reject religion, but he cannot escape the goodness and the holiness of Christ. They're being cruel to Jesus, but it's so obvious that he's full of love and kindness, which is making this criminal aware of his own sin. 42. Then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. This guy just got saved. 43. Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. He was saved on his deathbed. And that's great. A deathbed repentance and conversion to Christ get a person to heaven. The thing is, God deserves to be our Lord much sooner than on our deathbed. Verse 44. It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over all the land until the 9th hour. Jesus was nailed to the cross at 9 a.m. At noon, the brightest time of the day. It got dark, and it stayed dark until Jesus died at 3 in the afternoon. 45, while the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in the middle. The temple curtain was there to separate God from sinful man. It was a constant reminder that man's sin made it impossible for him to come into the presence of the Lord. It was a reminder that the gates of heaven were shut. But notice verse 46, and Jesus cried with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he gave up the spirit. So notice how that veil ripped when Jesus died. This is huge. Very important. God the Father tore that thing from top to bottom, and by doing it, he was saying, Jesus, my son, has done what nothing or no one else could do. Jesus did everything that needed to be done to make it possible for sinners to come into God's presence. And that's why the Father ripped the curtain. Some people don't believe that it literally happened. And they claim to believe the Bible. It happened. There's no reason to suggest that this is figurative language. Start doing that. You're going down a risky road where every verse of the Bible becomes fair game. 47. When the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God and said, "Certainly, this was a righteous man." And so the guy in charge of the crucifixion was saying, in essence, we never should have nailed Jesus to the cross. He didn't deserve to die. He was righteous. Holy behavior under intense pressure cannot be faked. And that's what Jesus has displayed, and that's what convinced the Roman soldier that he was righteous. 48. All the crowds who came together to that sight, witnessing what occurred, struck their chest and returned. This bunch who formerly liked Christ had recently demanded his crucifixion, but now, it seems, after seeing how he suffered with such grace, they're once again reminded why they liked him so much to begin with. Verse 49. But all those who knew him and the women accompanying him from Galilee stood at a distance, seeing these things. And those who cared about Christ couldn't do anything to help him. All they could do was watch him suffer. 50. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, who was a good and just man. Joseph was a decent guy. He was actually one of the religious rulers, and he was kind and cared about justice. A real rarity among that bunch. 51. He had not consented to their counsel and deed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, and he himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. So he was a Jewish leader, but he was against putting Christ to death. 52. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Nicodemus knew that Jesus should not have been murdered, and he's sure not going to allow the Lord's body to remain in the open where it might be abused by those who killed him. So, he really takes a risk in asking for the body to give a decent burial to someone that the Romans just crucified. I mean, that puts him squarely on the side of a executed criminal. Took guts, took faith, and he didn't care. 53. Then he took him down and wrapped him in linen and placed him in a hewn tomb where no one had ever been buried. God raised a man from the dead back in the Old Testament when his body was thrown into the tomb of a prophet. You might recall that story. It made contact with the prophet Elisha's body, and instantly he was raised from the dead. And God did not want his enemies to be able to attribute the resurrection of Jesus Christ to anything, even something like that. So Jesus was buried in a new tomb that had never been used. It was a private room, as it were. 54. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was drawing near. Every Friday was preparation day. It was a day when people prepared for the weekly Sabbath. So all work that needed to be done before sundown on Friday. 55. The women who came with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was placed. The ladies had plans to return to the tomb after the Sabbath in order to anoint Jesus' body with spices, so they carefully observed where his tomb was. 56. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments on the Sabbath, and they rested according to the commandment. The Sabbath law prohibited them from returning to the tomb until Sunday morning. See how God had everything figured out? Christ will be raised on the third day, and the ladies are forced to wait until the third day to return to the tomb. Result? They're witnesses to the empty tomb and the resurrection of Jesus Christ.